Welcome. I was having a great conversation the other day with my friend Brian, and we were talking about all kinds of health topics. And we thought it'd be fun just to share a bit of a conversation about it as I answered some questions and we just had a conversation. So, Brian, thanks for swinging over.
Well, thanks, Phil, for having me. So just to say what Phil was saying is, I know because Phil's my neighbor that he's been really into all this diabetes and all this other stuff for a long time. And we were chatting the other day, and it occurred to me that I don't actually know anything about it. So I started asking him a couple questions, and next thing you know, I had a revelation about diabetes, what it is, how it works.
Yeah.
And so I thought, hey, why don't we have this conversation on camera and share it with people?
Yeah, that sounds great.
So here's how the conversation started. Knowing what you've been up to, and the fact that for the last 6 months or so, I've been my daily routine seems to be that I have a cup of coffee, I put cream and sugar in it, and then oftentimes I don't eat anything until 1 or 2 p.m.
Yeah.
And I've always thought, oh, this must be really bad for me, because that's kind of what I've always heard. So I asked Phil, I said, hey, how bad is that for me?
Right. And that's something that it just kind of fit with your lifestyle. You're busy, you're working. It's just kind of what was working out.
The nature of how life has been lately. We have 3 young kids. They all have to get out the door in the morning, and then I've got my whole day to do. And so, I often have my coffee and don't end up eating till later. So I asked you that question, and
yeah, we're in this context. Stereotypically, everybody says, got to get your 3 squares in. And if you ask the average, person, they'll tell you breakfast is the most important meal of the day. And we kind of have this culture that reinforces the idea oh, you're doing something bad if you don't do it. And I think the real kind of paradigm changing realization is just that that's not actually true, that the human body is actually quite capable of functioning in a food-free space. It's why we have energy storage. And it's actually the first step that I have people consider if they're trying to lose weight or burn up blood sugar, is just to say, hey, how are you feeling in the morning? Could you actually get by and feel comfortable without eating a breakfast? Because most people least hungry in the morning, actually,
that's true for me too.
Some people just naturally do it.
Right.
And if you might naturally do it anyway, then it is definitely not a struggle to do. And many people say, oh yeah, I used to do that in college or something like that. And so that's actually where I have people start, because the body is saving energy for us to kind of fill in the gaps between our eating. And one of the reasons that people struggle so much to lose weight is that there's just no gaps. There's nowhere to ever plug in, that energy.
And this is I had no idea about that concept until we talked a week or so ago.
Yeah.
So I think we started talking. I said, how bad is that? I think you said something about that's a great question. No one's ever actually studied that, which is also fascinating.
Yeah.
But you said, well, but I've got some thoughts on it. And then we started talking about this. And as we talked about it, it just my mind just started exploding with all this stuff. And at some point I said, wait a minute here, which is what you were just saying. I thought you were supposed to have your 3 meals and never let your blood sugar drop and all that stuff. And then you said something about, no, that's not really true. That's not how the body works, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Body, extremely versatile, is something that I think people will be very encouraged to hear, because I think, and I know myself, before I came across these practices, I always felt burdened, oh, I have to get these meals in, or I'd be at work and I'd be seeing patients and I'd run overtime and I'm working through lunch, and all of a sudden it's heading into the next session already for the afternoon. I'm thinking man, I've still got to find food and get this, and if I don't do it, something bad is going to happen. And so one of the big things I want to communicate to people is hey, actually the body is very strong and resilient. It has large amounts of reserve energy, and a fasting process is a thoughtful, gentle way that we can just train our body how to handle these spaces. And as we do that, it just takes so much pressure off to realize we're not tethered so intensely to these schedules. And one way to look at it is like the first time is usually the hardest for people. I think one way people are not used to some sort of fasting space, and then something bad happens, right? They get a flat tire and they're stranded somewhere, and then they get into this mindset where they say like, oh, well, that was an awful experience and I was so hungry, and the two stresses get kind of put together. So really what fasting is about is like voluntarily taking that food-free part, but putting it into a really thoughtful space. Whereas like, okay, you don't have a flat tire, you don't have double booked meetings, and we can just let the body, give the body space to use that energy that's there.
So when you were just commenting on that, it made me think of one of the thoughts that went through my head when we were talking the other day, which is that I walked into this thinking it's probably really bad for me.
Yeah.
That, I'm just having some coffee and then going hours without having anything. And by the time we left the conversation, I walked out going, wow, you're telling me it's actually healthy what I've been doing. And, that just was such a shift in my thinking. And also very pleasant to know.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I guess, as we were talking about it, then I started asking more questions. So I'm an engineer. I'm not a life science guy, but I have a bit of a sciencey background. So I started asking you some more questions about like, well, wait a minute here. What is the deal with blood sugar and insulin? And then you had an explanation for kind of how that worked, which I never had any idea about it. I honestly, I didn't even understand what insulin did. I didn't understand the significance of blood sugar.
Yeah.
Do you want to like kind of go over that?
Yeah, I'd love to. And I just will share one thought as you were just kind of reflecting on, okay, hearing this, like, hey, actually what I'm doing is not so bad, and that it can be encouraging. And I think I just want to create ways for people to understand that, okay, the body has natural practices where we can lose weight, and it doesn't have to be difficult to understand or complicated. I think, if we look back over the last, 30, 40 years in our country, it's been so hard for people to lose weight, and it's been made so complex that there's all this math, and you have to count all the calories and carbs and macros, and you feel like you need some sort of college degree just to like, do all the steps, when the reality is, okay, there's very simple paths. And the things that I like to have people count is like, actually, how many times are you eating in a day? Is it 3 times or 2, And like, that's kind of the level of math that I want people to get to. And then people are like, could it really be that simple? And when people realize, oh, it can actually be that simple, then it's like just taking a burden off for people,
Yeah. So one of the things I found really fascinating was what happens when I drink my coffee that I've loaded up with sugar.
Yeah, so that's a place to start, and then maybe we can go from there into insulin and that sort of thing. So when I'm talking to people about creating a food-free space, which is kind of like, if I'm trying to use gentler language, if someone says like, oh, fasting, it sounds very intense. I was like, well, everybody has food-free space in their day. You stop eating at some point and you go to bed. And so while you're sleeping, we eat something, we think we're done. Okay, but you eat something, you just committed the body to like 12 hours of work to process all that food. And so if you were done eating like by 7 o'clock at night, and then you made it through the evening, overnight, you're coming around toward breakfast at 7, it's 12 hours later. Now the body is just kind of done with that, and it's back to a state where it's starting to say, okay, like, what's the next energy that we're going to do here? Because if there's no more food energy, food is energy, and while we're eating, body knows that. Lots of hormonal signals are happening. But as those signals die out, and the food is running out, body say, okay, what's next? And usually what's next is blood sugar. And blood sugar what it is food that you previously ate, and it's still floating around the bloodstream. If it's elevated, body wants to control our blood sugar in a very tight range. And so a process, if you have prediabetes or diabetes, the body has not effectively processed all that energy and gotten it put away inside the cell. And so it's floating around in the bloodstream. And so if you've kind of gone through the last meal you ate, but the blood sugar is still high, now that energy is right there for the body to use. The body will start running off of that energy. And if you're trying to deal with a blood sugar problem or you're trying to lose weight, like that's a very good thing to be able to do. Instead of putting more food into the system, right? You open up some fasting space, you can just use the energy that's already there, burn it up naturally. That's making sense, right?
I see. Now that, let me just kind of restate that in the way that I understood it when we chatted about it. So my understanding, and you correct me if I've got this a little off, was that I'm going to eat some food. The food's gonna get digested, and the sugar's going to go out into my blood, right? And and actually one of the key things there, which I think maybe we should go to in a minute, it was this concept of insulin resistance. But the sugar goes out in my blood, and then insulin is this hormone that gets secreted because the body has detected that there's sugar now, and the insulin goes into the blood and tells the cells, okay, absorb this sugar.
Yeah.
Right? And if you're starting to have a problem with diabetes, your cells, my understanding was basically that the body's sending out the insulin saying absorb the sugar, but the cells are all going, no, we're full. We've already got, we've packed away as much sugar as we can, so they don't want to take up any more because they don't have any space for it. And so then you get this sugar just floating around in the blood, and the sugar molecule is this like highly reactive molecule.
Yeah.
And so it's not really this like stable thing that you want just floating around in your blood.
Yeah.
And so after a while, if you have too much of this excess sugar, the cells are all full, they don't want to take anymore. So you got all this sugar floating around, and then the sugar starts like attacking, the walls of blood vessels and whatever it comes into contact with.
Yeah.
And then that causes those blood vessels and things to get inflamed, which like this all just was mind blowing to me.
Yeah.
Right. And then on top of that, if I understand this correctly, you were saying that then the body puts cholesterol on the inflammation to try to tamp down the inflammation. Is that about right?
This can be a pathway toward atherosclerosis.
Right.
Or heart.
I mean, this is like, I had no idea that this like kind of series of events occurs, and that in a way it's like seems like, okay, so if we just cut the sugar down and wait until the body uses it all up, then like this problem really...
We really want to bring things down to the root level if we want to get way upstream of the whole process, because we were talking about, diabetes as a vascular disease, right? And that the end results of diabetes, all the sugar reacting, because this level is so high with the blood vessels, these glycosylation reactions that damage the blood vessels, it damages the tiny blood vessels the most, or at least first. And so where do we have the tiniest blood vessels in the body? In the retina, and that's why diabetes can affect the vision. The kidneys are just these huge collections of tiny little blood vessels, and that's why we get kidney disease, can lead to dialysis. And then tiny little blood vessels feed the nerves, especially the further you get out, the tiny little nerves that feed fingers and toes. And that's what leads to neuropathy, how people, end up having their toes amputated and all these sort of things is like a classic sort of thing. So you say, how do you bring all that and wind it all backwards and undo it? We're starting to get toward that root level when we get into a fasting space. And so like you were asking about, okay, sugar in the coffee, right? It's not like you can't do it. If someone has no blood sugar problem, like we say at the root level, someone is in perfect metabolic health, you throw some sugar into the system, and the body is going to detect that. It's going to secrete insulin in response to that, and it's going to knock it out quick. But the body can only handle that basically so many times. And, everything in life is kind of on some sort of distribution on a curve. And some people are able to tolerate more of this than others, and who knows exactly why that is. But the thing that is happening broadly in our society is that we are overloaded with all this sugar, and we don't get things back to a level where the body can just easily soak it up, like where you're saying. Because if we have, enough of this in the body, the body is trying to keep things into balance. I like the analogy of like how a cell just wants to share, right? On the cellular level, there's sugar around. The cell says like, I don't need that so much. That's why the insulin resistance, to kind of personify it, starts. Because a cell is not greedy. A cell will take what it needs, but it will try not to ever take more than it needs. And so kind of like think of it, like we were saying, like calluses on the hands, right? If you're working and always, lifting a weight or something, you build up a callus. But if you wear the velvet gloves and just walk around and have everybody else do things, okay, the calluses will go away. That's kind of like what you can think of insulin resistance as for the cell. And so if we're always, putting the sugar, and the coffee is just one example, then we're always giving that stimulation, and then that can build up resistance. And so when we create
and that's because, and that's basically, this is what I didn't understand, is that's basically because the cells are full.
Yeah.
It's not because of some other like, we can't, we're tired, we can't process it anymore. They're just full. And we got to like drain them back down.
Yeah, we can store in different cells in the body can behave in different ways, but we have something called a glycogen reserve. Glycogen is when you string a whole bunch of sugars together just in one molecule. You can store it a lot more compactly. And we can store a kind of an energy slush fund, a day or two of a sugar reserve in there, so the body can easily, if we're running low on sugar, we can always, have more when we need it. And so, once we get beyond that point and it's filled up, then, okay, you don't need it so much. Now we're turning those pathways into storing that sugar away as body fat.
Well, and actually that was another thing we talked about, which I also had no idea, is you were talking about how like the body kind of has 2 or 3 different modes that it runs in. Yeah. And it doesn't necessarily just instantaneously flip between them. It kind of has to like spin one down and spin the other up. So say a little bit more about that.
I like the analogy of kind of like a light switch. Like it's instant in one way. So most of the time we're eating at least every 12 hours. And as long as we're eating pretty continually every 12 hours or so, we stay in a mode that is like food burning. And, we eat a meal and then we try to burn through that energy. And after 12 hours, hormonally, that's when things start to reset in the body. Our insulin level especially is dropping down. There are counter-regulatory hormones to insulin, kind of like the opposite. Insulin, like you were saying, it's trying to take the extra sugar and jam it inside of our cells to get it outside of the bloodstream. The energy isn't disappearing. This is how insulin, like if you're taking extra insulin, why it causes weight gain, because you're taking all that energy and you're jamming it inside the cells. So we want to create the opposite environment, right? If you want to lose weight, if you want to burn up blood sugar, we're trying to burn down that energy. To do that really effectively, you need to get the body out of kind of storage mode, right? Storage mode is like we're eating food, we're running off that energy, and any excess insulin is there to store it inside the body. So every time we eat, we kind of instantly...
just to say that, so that's... Even now I'm learning more. So I eat food. And the food starts getting digested and in my blood, and the sugar's in my blood. And some of that is just going to be picked right out and used to power my body right now.
Yeah, think of the most straightforward example. You're exercising, you're playing some sports, and you drink a Gatorade, right? And that sugar energy is going to flow right into the bloodstream within minutes, and muscle cell going to be able to suck that up and use it right away. So that would be like the simplest version of it.
So then the insulin isn't even there to say, oh, hey, you got some sugar here, you need to do something so you can use it. The insulin's actually there to say, hey, you got some extra sugar, you better sock some of that away.
That's especially true. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I had no idea about
two different ways that sugar can get into the cell. When we're exercising, especially muscle cell, and it actively needs it, the muscle cell can directly suck up sugar without insulin. But every other time, basically, to get sugar out of the blood, you need insulin to kind of push it in, push it in there.
So the insulin is basically there to say, okay, we got food, but we don't actually need it right now. So let's store that away.
That's a nice way to think about it.
And then that way, when we do need it, it's ready to go. It's right there.
So we want to create an environment. I'm saying we flip that switch over 12 hours. Okay, most people, you go through 12 hours, you get to that point, and that's just when the system is starting to say, okay, food is done. Now let's start dive in, burn this blood sugar. If we were to continue that process and we normalized our blood sugar down to a normal level, that's the signal then where the body will say, okay, what's next? Then we start accessing the body fat. And then it's a little bit of a continuum. It's not like it instantly flips over at some magic point, but kind of overlapping areas. As we're clearing through the food, we're ramping up blood sugar. And as the blood sugar is normalizing, especially as we head out toward 16 to 18 hours, then we're really ramping up access to body fat. So you see, it takes a while to flip that switch over, but then it instantly flips back. And then you reset things. And so this is where I was going with like throw cream and sugar in the coffee, is people don't realize like, okay, you just took 12 hours overnight. You ate all this food and then you had this space. You're just getting to a point where you could do some interesting things in the body, where instead of running off new energy, the body could say, hey, let's like clean house here. Let's kind of grab the excess energy and just run off that. And then most people say, eat something. You say, does cream or sugar mess up that process? And that's the thing I think, like you were saying before, people haven't really precisely studied that exactly. It's hard to give you, I can't cite studies on cream and sugar and direct metabolic effects like there should be. I mean, in $1 trillion health system, I think we should have some studies that really look into it. But what I can say is that physiologically in the body, it certainly could. And many people, anecdotally in my experience, do experience that. And so it's kind of 50-50 in my view. Some, in my weight clinic, I'll have some people where they say, hey, it's really important to me to keep the cream and sugar. Like, I just like it so much. I say, look, we're not going after perfection here. And if you can accomplish everything you want and your blood sugar gets better and you're losing the weight you want, like, I don't care if you keep it. Now, a cream and a sugar is not like a health food, right? So I never tell anybody to do it. I drink my coffee black, and that's what keeps you in a fasting sort of state. What I'll tell you is it could do it. And, what if you say, well, 20 calories of sugar, how can that really matter? And I say, we have this calorie-focused thinking, right? Everything in kind of a weight counseling space, for example, always, how many calories are you getting? We don't think about the hormonal signals we're sending to the body. And one of the most fascinating things is like, okay, you put something sweet, which could even be an artificial sweetener that has even no calories. But what is happening when we taste sweet? So we taste things for different reasons, one of which is there are nerve signals that go from our tongue down to the pancreas that is telling the body like sugar is coming. And insulin is made on demand. It takes about 20 minutes to get it ready. And it takes about 20 minutes when we're eating something till it's going through the stomach into the first part of the small bowel and then is absorbed. And then the insulin is ready. So it's just such a beautiful system. But then you can see, okay, the body doesn't know that how much sugar is exactly coming. It just knows sugar is coming. And it doesn't know that we won't continue eating, because really how the body is set up is to like eat meals. And so all of a sudden you create a hormonal environment where it thinks a meal is coming. It's getting our insulin ramped up. Yeah, can it flip that switch? That's what the switch is that I'm describing. Flip that switch is the hormone levels like insulin. And so we can be raising our insulin levels, communicating to the body, hey, it's not time to run off the storage, food is here. And then we start to put the body metabolically in a difficult place.
Yeah. Now, I mean, again, I know there's no studies on this, but so if you had to guess, so I've just had my coffee, it tastes sweet, the body says, oh, there's food coming, it switches in these hormones on and gets ready. But there's really only a tiny bit of sugar in there. So that gets consumed like pretty quick.
Yeah.
Then what do you think the body's doing?
Because the sugar, you say 20 calories, like this is going to run the body for 20 minutes, it isn't a big deal. But can it have hormonal effects? So one of the most frustrating places that people get into is what I call this metabolic trap, where it's like they're dieting, they're restricting their calories way down, but they're never fasting. So they're always getting little bits of energy coming in. But little bits of energy are not enough to run the body. And so now we're sending conflicting signals to the body where we're not eating very much food, but we're always eating. We're never fasting. And so the body is like, well, what do we do? The hormones telling us we can't be fasting. We're not supposed to be accessing body fat and the energy storage, but then there's only 20 calories here. And this is how people trigger this negative metabolic adaptation that slows their metabolism down. And so people end up in this extremely frustrating place, whereas like they're not eating very much. They're not losing weight. They feel low energy, cold, like sluggish, all these things. Whereas like, because the body is kind of in this conservation mode. And this has been shown in lots of studies. And this is why certain medical providers classically counsel against fasting, because this effect is shown basically linearly. The more you calorie restrict over time without fasting, see, nobody's studying fasting like this. They just make the assumption that this curve continues all the way down to zero, except they never study the zero case, right? This curve inverts when you, for a period of time, not indefinitely, you can't, fast forever, obviously, but for a period of time, this inverts. And that's what can reset the system, is you actually give the body the clear signals, right? You eat a healthy meal, very clear to the body. Okay, there's food here. And it's enough to run off it. That body understands that. And then we have the food-free space, also very clear to the body. Hey, there's no food here. Now we need to shut down all these food systems, start burning off the blood sugar, running off the storage. And that's how like the cream and sugar can start monkeying with that.
I also remember when we were chatting about this, you were commenting on, which made total sense, that, for a lot of human history, we didn't have a kitchen right there that we could just constantly be going to for food. So it was very normal for humans to come across a big meal, have that big meal, and then they don't know when they're going to get their next meal. So the body is designed to either be in the meal processing mode or in the, okay, we're not, we don't have food immediately, and we're now going to keep the body going until we get that next meal, which we don't know when that's coming in. So it can go in these two modes.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I can't claim personal insight into what it's like to live in some indigenous culture, but, there are, anthropological studies like looking at cultures like this, people not sitting around snacking all the time, and then no fridge and these things. And you just think what it must have been like. Like it's not like sitting around or watching TV, get a bag of chips. Like these sort of things are so abnormal, just to have all these tempting foods around all the time. A lot of the foods that are most enticing for us to eat just simply haven't existed very long. And then if you think about
like the processed foods,
right, which is the worst, that is sending like the highest amount of insulin signals, which are the hormones, like the most like fat storage focused hormone. Like it'd be hard to get a lot of that if you're eating like a real natural, unprocessed sort of diet. And then the ubiquity at having it always around, like clearly it just couldn't have been that way. And then, that's what we see. I mean, societies historically have not been suffering from obesity and diabetes, epidemics or whatever you want to call it. Like we were looking at data the other day that by age 65, it's almost 80% of the population is either diabetic or pre-diabetic. It's only the last generation really that it has been like that, and 2 generations since this process really started. And so if we want to start unwinding that, we need to take a look at these sort of process, very basic ways that we run our bodies. I've always thought, like, wouldn't it be nice if we had an instruction manual like that was like foolproof, It's like, no, this is really how it works. And we need to think about this history, how people have run their metabolism healthfully and well in the past. And the main things that I come across, eat healthy, unprocessed food, get some good exercise, and open up enough fasting space, not more than you need, but just enough to get you the effect, that works.
Yeah, to get that body, to get your body into that other mode.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's the part that, like, gosh, this was so mind blowing to me. And it just seems so reasonably intuitive. I just had never thought about it before. Like,
yeah,
you're either going to be processing the food you just ate, or moving into a mode where you're looking for other ways to get stored energy.
I like thinking of it like different operating systems, and like, I'm not a big computer guy, but like, people kind of get like, maybe you have a Windows or you have an OS X is like running like the interface of the system, but then there's like the operating system that's like the level below that, whatever it is that like whoever is coding this stuff, you can get in if you hit the right keys, into this sub menu that's like really running at the root level, right? And that's what we want to get to in our metabolism, the different operating mode, not all the bells and whistles and this sort of stuff, but the root level that is controlling how is this system actually functioning. And it's kind of amazing that we can get access into this kind of root level just by opening up enough fasting space. And the thing about it, it doesn't have to be a ton. 16 to 18 hours can look just like eating 2 times a day instead of 3. That's something that some people might do, just anyway. Like you were saying, you were kind of just came into it, not for any reason other than it was just working for your life.
And in fact, actually, I was losing weight.
And almost like unintentionally, just like, oh, you start doing it, you're losing weight. That's why I like this. I don't even call fasting a diet, really, because like it's more like of a lifestyle sort of decision. Like, I'm just like a person. I just eat once or twice in a day instead of 2 or 3 or 4 or 6 times. So many times people head into some sort of nutrition counseling. They get told, well, eat 6 small meals a day to keep your metabolism going. This is a very common, piece of dietary advice. When it's like, it's usually not helpful for people. There's certain circumstances where that can help someone, but eating 6 times a day is very hard to eat less when you're eating more times, because people don't really like to just eat a little bit. You eat a little bit, you're like, where is the rest? And so it's like, it's very hard to lose weight eating very frequently.
Yeah, you want to eat and feel full.
Someone's trying to like, really lift tons of weight and get huge. Okay, eat 6 times a day. Like, that's going to help you bulk up, right? If you're trying to go in the opposite direction, is generally better to eat fewer times. Like, it makes logical sense, but the way that you do it is also important by like really keeping that food-free space open. Yeah. That's what makes it work.
And that's probably the last thing that for me was so kind of surprising, because I just, I guess I just ingested it from our society. This idea that like you always want your blood sugar and everything nice and even. You always want to have some food in there, and the idea that like, no, actually it's probably quite healthy and maybe even healthier to have some food and then have some period of time where you haven't had any food and then have food and then just keep recycling that. And if that just means that all I did was skip breakfast, like, I'm all for it.
Yeah. Yeah. I especially if we bring it back to this diabetes situation, I kind of summarize the system's approach to type 2 diabetes. Everything about it is like, oh, you have type 2 diabetes now we have to keep it stable. Like, and that's the goal. And stable type 2 diabetes, blood sugar stable all the time, is much better than having type 2 diabetes uncontrolled, like wildly swinging blood sugars and blood sugar going way too high, which is very dangerous. Okay, so stable is much better than uncontrolled. But the thing that is not optimal about it is people keep blood sugar stable by giving people the advice, little bits of food all the time, right? And that's what does what you're saying, keep the blood sugar stable all the time. The trouble with that is that's how you gain weight, and it's how you make diabetes worse over time, is by continually stimulating. That's how you develop diabetes to start with, basically, continuing that pressure all the time of the insulin, building up that callus, the insulin resistance keeps building up. The route that is better than keep diabetes stable is make diabetes go away. And that's the type of mindset that we just don't have in our culture. And it's one of the main things I want to help people do, because as we change that thinking and say, yeah, we want to open up this space, burn up the blood sugar instead of just jamming it in the cells to make it go away and building up the total energy in the system. Just open up the space and burn it up naturally. That's what reverses the process.
Yeah, I mean, that's to me, that sounds so intuitive and yet also so mind-blowing because it's something that I had never heard of, thought about, anything. It's really pretty fascinating.
It makes me excited because this process can be done for free. And, I was looking at the American Diabetes Association website the other day. It was saying annual costs of type 2 diabetes in America, which I think might include like lost time from work and other things. But it was like $500 billion. And I was like, I just think like, whoa, like if we could like really bring ourselves down to this root level and say fundamentally we've missed this core human function where we can make this condition. I'm not saying we can just eradicate it for everyone. I don't want to hype it in any way, but on a fundamental level that we can help people get to a root level, control it with less medications, less side effects, far less cost. Like, I'm glad that we can be talking about it because it just seems like the type of thing we need to talk a lot more about when we look at the spiraling costs in our healthcare system and the burnout that people have.
And for me, the key is that instead of thinking, which admittedly I had not put that much thought into it, but my understanding was just like kind of always keep food coming in, keep everything steady. Instead of doing that, we're just basically saying eat and then have a period where you don't eat.
Yeah.
And
much better.
And that's much better. I mean, that's just like such a simple change.
Yeah.
And then again, my own experience is just that, and I don't know if this works for everyone, but my own experience is just that, in the morning, I may be too busy to even sit down and have any food. And so, by the I don't really find that I'm even thinking about food until maybe 10 or 11 a.m. And by that time, if I just kind of, focus on my work or whatever and go another hour or two, it could be 1 p.m. or something. And now I'm ready to eat.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's amazing.
Can be a really nice way to go about it. And that's the way I want to try to help people reframe it, is to get into this sort of state where you have a pleasant distraction, you're staying busy, you're doing something you enjoy, or at least getting work done, and keep your mind off it. Like the worst way to try to dive into a practice like this would be to say, well, I'm just going to like clean the kitchen and like hang out around it. Like it's like right there. I always try to tell people, like, if you can get outside, clean other rooms. Like,
well, actually, and sure enough, if I was to be hanging around the kitchen, that would be a day where I probably would not be going till 1 or 2.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the days that I'm focused on doing my work or I've got work that I'm doing that's somewhere else and I can't just be grabbing food.
Yeah.
But I just want to come back to the idea that, like, I don't know, a week and a half ago, I was sure that the idea that I was missing breakfast was so bad for me.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what blew my mind, is that you're trying to tell me, no, that's actually good. Yeah, that to me, that's why I said, hey, let's have this chat, because that is a completely new idea for me. And then I went and talked to a bunch of my friends about it, and they all said, oh, yeah, haven't you heard about intermittent fasting or whatever? And I'm like, yeah, I mean, I may have heard the term, but like I had never put any of this together and thought that there was anything to it.
Yeah. I really think it is profound. And, sometimes I sit around and I think, am I making that up? I think it's profound, but really it's not. But like, it's such a simple thing. That's why it's hard to think, is it profound, right? And that's why it's so easy to blow it over, because it's like, oh, like someone says breakfast or no. But sometimes the simplest things are actually the most profound. Yeah. And the more I've leaned into it, I'm like, this is the core health problem that is facing our society, basically. And the solution to it is so simple. And I never say easy. I try to never say easy, because for some people it is very difficult to change, behavior. And, if someone finds it easy, I say that's the lowest hanging fruit, right? Like the first thing that we should do, I think, is to find every person with type 2 diabetes who doesn't find it a struggle and just let them know, hey, actually, there's this process where you just open up some more food-free space. If someone is taking medications, I always tell them you got to work with your medical team about that. And ideally, someone has a continuous glucose monitor so you can always know that your blood sugar is fine. An open food-free space is very powerful. That's the thing. It's more powerful than any diabetes medicine. It's more powerful than insulin. This is what we showed in our clinical study. You can replace insulin by using the fasting process. And how does it get more profound than that? A practice that anyone can learn to do that's more powerful than insulin that's free. And the more I think about it, I just say it's amazing, you know?
Yeah. All right. Well, maybe we should leave it at that. And,
really nice conversation.
Yeah,
I'm so happy that you started asking these questions, and I'm glad that we could
me too.
Chat about it. Yeah. And thanks for taking the time.
Yeah. Now I want to take it a step further and start doing some monitoring on myself or whatever and see how this stuff goes. But
yes.
But thank you very much, Phil.
All right. Thanks so much for joining us. I'll see you back here on the channel soon.